Hey everybody, welcome back to the new Science of Physical Health lab. I'm here off location. We're back in the lab. We had a very different approach to today's lab. Most of what you've seen on my channel so far is based around the science of longevity and the science of Healthspan that I've gathered with all of the PhDs in different disciplines that I've interviewed over the past half a decade. And also combining that with a lot of the education work that I've done. Now, what we're going to do today, the different approaches, we're going to focus in way more on the education side. Education is based around frameworks. Just think about this, for example. In mathematics, how would mathematics work if you didn't have multiplication framework? How it would work if you didn't have the long division framework? How would science work without the elements framework, the elements table? So in education, in learning, wherever you are in the world, because we've got viewers all over the world with this particular channel, wherever you are in the world, you learn frameworks. Well, today we're going to examine my framework, the one that I've spent 40 years of going inside classrooms and out to the practical field, because I teach health and physical education. This is the jumper that I'm wearing today. Been out teaching. So I've been out doing exactly what I've said I've been doing for the past 40 years. So I've been in and out of classrooms at least 50,000 times, and also the actual practical lessons as well. And I've created this framework. So the very second page of my book is this diagram that you see next to me, the framework, and has 5 sections to it. We're not going through the whole framework. We're only going to go through section 1 of the framework today, the perfect health lesson. People ask me quite often, what is this 1 hour perfect health lesson that I've created a whole ecosystem around? I want to dive into today the statement you see at the top of the diagram, not the one in green, the perfect health lesson, and the statement at the bottom. It says, solve the biggest public health problem or the biggest public health crisis of the 21st century. That's what today's new Science of Physical Health lab is going to be all about. It's my argument, my supposition, my position statement. There's a critical distinction in public health. It's like you can read on this image next to me here. I think that after doing all of these lessons, these 50,000 lessons, I estimate I've held 5 million conversations with learners about the topics of health and physical education. And in my estimation, the reason that most people aren't longevity builders, so this community, the people that are building into this community over on my audio podcast and the people here on the channel, we're longevity builders. That's what we do. But as you'll see throughout this presentation here, most people aren't, because I think we tackle things the wrong way. Here's the distinction. There are 2 things. There is the public health crisis, no matter what country you're in, listening to, from. There is a public health crisis in your community. People with chronic disease that is rampant. We'll go through that too. But there's also a public health problem. They almost sound like they'd be the same, but they're not. And the distinction is absolutely critical in this discussion that I want to share with you, the teaching I want to share about how do you become a longevity builder. And if you're a person watching this and you want to use this channel to help encourage other people that you care about, or other people that you might, they might come to you because they're clients of yours, but there might be family members, there might be people you work with, or it's yourself. You're starting out, you might be a beginner, and you go, I do want to improve my longevity. I want to improve my chances of living longer and without serious disease that would impact my life. That's called Healthspan. So what's the difference between the biggest public health crisis of the 21st century and the biggest public health problem of the 21st century? All right, let's examine the diagram, the infographic you can see next to me here. I'm going to define briefly, albeit briefly, the biggest public health crisis of the 21st century. You notice I put emphasis on the 2 different words, crisis and problem. There's a reason. I look at what I call the big 4. What I want to do with this channel, the new Science of Physical Health, both here on this channel and also over on the podcast, the New Science of Physical Health, the audio podcast, is I want to be able to decrease your clinical complications, your risk of having clinical complications, where you go to a doctor and they say, well, you've got some complications from being overweight, not just obesity, like class 2, class 3, class 4 obesity, but just being overweight. We've got some diseases we've got to treat because you're being overweight. That's a complication. I want to reduce your clinical complications from the risk of the number one cause of sickness and disease and premature death worldwide, whether it's here in Australia where I live, whether it's where a lot of the different people we have in the United States of America, all throughout Europe, people in South Africa, we've got some people in the Far East, all over the world, Canada, England, all over the world who tune into the channel. The number one cause of sickness, disease, and premature death is heart attack and stroke. I want to reduce, as a longevity builder, as someone who teaches longevity building, I want to teach people how to reduce their clinical risk of complications from heart attack and stroke, type 2 diabetes, high blood sugar, and all that comes with that, and another cluster of conditions called metabolic syndrome. We dive into that inside my book and some other areas here on the channel. Okay, the biggest public health crisis is what you're used to hearing. Every newspaper article that I get in my news feed, right, on my iPhone through Apple News, and you might have Google News, but every article that I get that's about health is always focusing on mostly the big four. And the other one that I don't include in the big four, even though it's the second leading cause worldwide of death, is cancer events. I talk about that in a different light for a different reason. I focus on these. I won't go into what that reason is, but I focus on these, but cancer events as well. Every article I talk about talks about the crisis. How do you get people's blood pressure down? How do you get people's blood sugar down? What are we going to put this tax on? So on and so on. Tax on sugary drinks, for example, or fatty foods, so we can help people drive down their obesity levels. How are we going to improve that as a society, whether you live in Australia? I know America's working on it right now. The chronic disease area. I know over in England, they're doing the same thing, and they tackled it in different ways. That's the crisis that you hear about in the media because it makes a great story. But it's not the biggest public health problem of the 21st century. So what is, all right, here next to me, the biggest public health problem of the 21st century. Look at this statement. I wrote this statement after all of the lessons that I've taught you. I sit with people day after day after day after day, both adults and teenagers. I sit with both groups, talking about, I'm in love with them, I'm obsessed with my disciplines of health and physical education. I love it. Look at the statement I wrote. Most teenagers and nearly all adults are not in love with wanting to be physically healthy. To me, that's the biggest public health problem of the 21st century. So now we've got a definition of both. The chronic diseases that we know about and hear in the media all the time. This is how you go and use a GLP-1 agonist to help you lose weight. Go and have surgery. I saw this one yesterday, a brand new shake being developed here in Australia, like a chocolate shake thing that you drink that has a certain fatty acid chain that will help you lower your blood pressure. That's what we hear about in the media all the time, is how do we tackle the crisis? We don't hear about is this one. The biggest public health problem of the 21st century is people are just not in love with wanting to become classified as physically healthy. How does that impact our discussion? All right, this diagram, this infographic here, is how it impacts the conversation. Let's look at this. I call it the ignored epidemic, lack of desire. I've just seen it literally for 4 decades now. Hammer, the biggest public health crisis of the 21st century. Teach people all about the things that could go wrong with their body or are going wrong with their body. Always, by the way, at a surface level. Very few adults know at a level sufficient, a deep level I call it, sufficient enough to be able to lower their clinical risk of complications from sickness, disease, and premature death. It's the reason I wanted to teach people longevity building, because they don't have the deep knowledge. But we have this, instead of the crisis, the problem, we have this ignored epidemic a lack of desire of people wanting to become physically healthy. I think that's the problem that is overlooked. We teach what to do, but we don't cultivate as a community. I know we don't in our community. I know we don't in our country. I know we don't in your community. And I know we don't in your country, no matter where you live. We don't cultivate the want to do it. How do I know that? Because I understand the epidemiological studies and the amount of disease that exists here in Australia. I know what the rates of heart disease are. I know that there's about 50,000 people a year die of heart attacks. At least 80% of those are premature, meaning they should never have happened. Probably more, because of the tools that we have today in science and medicine, and also what I teach here on this channel, the new science of physical health, on how to lower your clinical complications so it never happens to you. We don't teach the want, because the data about heart attacks in the United States of America, 800,000 people a year die of a heart attack and stroke. 80 to 85%, probably 90% are premature. They should never have happened if people had the right tools. More importantly, if people had created the want. Look at the next statement there in this infographic. We have this assumption that people will act, make the right choices with the correct dose of physical activity if they know what the risks are, if they don't. But history shows from decades and decades and decades, that ain't true. Nearly 4 decades ago, 3.5 decades ago, my father dies of a heart attack at 46 years old. Had no concept, never been taught how to lower your clinical risk of complications, never been taught the concept of being a longevity builder. His father before him, 6 decades ago, passed away of a heart attack at 60 years of age. Here I am at 59. Not because it's genetics that I'm at risk, but I've put myself in a position through my field of study and my field of practice of learning how to actually create low clinical risk of heart attack and stroke and other chronic diseases. So we don't teach the want. It's easy for me because I've been in love with this field for 40 years now. But it's not the case for most people. What is the case for most people is they put the cart before the horse. Not because that's what they instinctively do, but that's what they're instinctively learning in their education systems and school life. And then when they get out to become an adult in their 20s, in their 30s, in their 40s, then they're instinctively learning it through the media. You instinctively learn. And I know this for a fact from observation after all these decades of being in front of learners, adults and teenagers. I know that people instinctively learn, I've got to work on my blood pressure. I've got to work on my weight. I want to look better. I want to feel better. I don't want to be at risk of cancer. A friend of mine got cancer. I've heard that being overweight can help cause cancer. True, very true. It can, definitely. I want to be in a better position. So we're tackling, and then we'll find out in a minute just what percentage of adults are not interested. And they're not interested because of this. Remember what the crisis and the problem are. The crisis are the chronic diseases. The problem is people just aren't in love with wanting to be classified as medically healthy in the first place. And look at the statement I have at the book. So we've got to put the problem first. We've got to solve that problem first of all, which is what my whole channel is really about. Without desire, solutions for the crisis fall on deaf ears for many. I would even go so far as to say for the vast majority of people in your local community, the vast majority of people in your family. If you're on this channel and you're already interested in longevity, if you're already interested in improving your oxygen efficiency score, I talk about that in other video episodes. If you're already interested in improving your health span, then you're one of that narrow band of people that have come to this channel. But whilst I want you on this channel, they're not the ones around your local community that are at most risk, because you're doing something about it just by being here on the channel. All right, we're going to put the problem first. We've got to find a way to solve how do we get people to fall. That's my big mission. to how to get them to fall in love with wanting to be physically healthy in the first place. And then as we start to do that, and I've got a lot of methodologies and frameworks to do that, as we start to do that, we can then help them tackle the crisis. And that is, how do we lower their clinical risk from complications from those chronic diseases? You see, if we don't teach people who are not in love, we don't draw people in to the mission of the new science of physical health and other people who have similar missions. And my mission, to teach people to be a longevity builder. There are consequences of people who do not get drawn in to this message, to what we do here on the channel. I've got listeners in 97 countries. We've got thousands of people all over the world. We've got just new, as I record this, very new YouTube channel. I think we're getting somewhere with all the video content between the shorts and these longer form videos. We get somewhere around about 4,000 or 5,000 views a day of our content, which is great. It's not enough. We're just starting out. We're at the bottom of the hill on this channel. The podcast channel going well, a lot of people, but we need more. We need more people from your local community, more people that you know, that you care about, who they're the biggest public health problem of the 21st century. They are not in love with wanting to be physically healthy. That's the call out. That's the reach out that I've got. There's consequences for people who don't go and solve the problem, who ignore the problem. They don't prioritize their health. They're at risk on vulnerability to premature death. I just talked a minute ago about my father and about my grandfather. I talked on a channel the other day, on a video the other day on this channel about my 38-year-old nephew just had a heart attack. He's alive, 2 stents. I've just spoke recently with an Australian Olympic gold medalist who was one of 16 men in Olympic Games history to win the men's 200-meter freestyle when he was 22 years old. Fast forward to 52 years of age. At 52 years of age, a couple of years ago, he had such a serious heart attack that the next day he had emergency open heart surgery for a triple bypass. That's a consequence. Got a very, very good friend of mine right now. His wife has a cancer that's deadly. Another friend of someone we know through something to do with my son and his sporting activities. One of the mums, she's 43 years old. She has stage 4 cancer in a number of different areas of her body. They are the consequences of ignoring the problem. So my call to action here is we've got to dive into solving the problem to solve the crisis. It's like the lock that opens up everything. And I think it's a real challenge that we haven't even worked on. But I work on it every single day that I put content out through this channel and through the podcast and through all of the materials that we have. We have the Perfect Health Lesson book. We have the premium podcast channel with all the different content on there. Then we have the interactive book with infographics that goes along with it. Then we have the online classroom. And we've got something, I'll just briefly mention this. We've got something in development called a longevity builder health impact technology. That's all I'm going to say about it later. More on that bit later on. Okay, we're going to find out more about solving the problem to solve the crisis. So with that in mind, I want to draw your attention to this. Who are we failing to reach? Look, this is my concepts that I have originally from my book, expanded to other parts of the ecosystem of the new science of physical health and the perfect health lesson framework, which I talked about briefly at the start here. Who are we failing to reach? This is the conclusion I've come to after all these years of working with learners, adults and teenagers. The minority of people in our community, where I live and where you live, and your country, your state and your country, your province and your country, the minority of people are what I call person A. It could be you could be this person. You already have solved the problem. You're already in love with wanting to be a longevity builder. That's a pretty simple concept, isn't it? A longevity builder. You want to be around to enjoy the experiences of life for as long as possible with the least amount of disease, and least complications and least risk of it. That's person A. I've said here about 10% of the community, but I think, to be honest, it's probably less. but let's just call it 10% as a generic number, an approximate number, who are already in love with wanting to be classified as physically healthy, and they're engaged in the concept of the community that I'm building called Longevity Builder. All right, the majority of people are what you see in the diagram there, person B and person C. Let me explain this. Person B and person C, when they went to school, they were compelled to be involved in PE classes, physical education lessons. They were compelled to be involved in sport. But they leave school. How many times have I seen this pattern repeated over the, I don't know how many millions of students I might have taught? I don't know if it's millions. It's tens of thousands that I've taught over the decades. How many people get out of the framework of a school environment where you've got dedicated lessons? Oh, I'm going to this lesson, I'm going to this lesson, I'm going to this lesson. There's a timetable. Oh, here's PE, here's sport, here's health. That's how we run it in Australia. And I know it's different in different countries. But person B is the person who has lost interest. They've gone into the workforce. They're no longer in the structured environment of their physical education classes or their sport classes, sport lessons. And now they're just working throughout the day. They're tired when they get home. Sometimes maybe in their 20s, maybe in their 30s. They get together and with someone and they have a family. And all of a sudden that soaks up time. They lose interest. That's the majority of people B. Then included in this category of the majority are people C. Those people have never had an interest. They didn't like PE. They didn't like sport at school. And they're never interested in how do you use the correct dose of physical activity to raise your oxygen efficiency score as measured by your VO₂ Max in order to drive down your clinical risk of complications from premature death, from sickness, and from chronic disease. And included in that, person B and person C, they don't understand the link between raising this thing that I talk about here on the channel called your oxygen efficiency score through the correct dose of physical activity that then leads to molecular and physiological health adaptations. What are these adaptations? What are they? I'll give you one. I got about 20 something in my book. Here's one. Okay. Every time you use the correct dose of physical activity on a daily basis, we have some software that we give you. There's a link in the comments here and in the show notes on how to get that software. We give you some software to track what the correct dose of physical activity is. No matter what your job is, no matter what your career is, you can find out whether or not you're getting the correct dose of physical activity to raise your oxygen efficiency score. But here's an adaptation. That's what I was talking about. Every time you use the correct dose of physical activity, your brain releases into your bloodstream all around your body a molecule called nitric oxide. Now, this molecule causes your artery, the lining of your arteries to become more flexible, more elastic. They become more elastic, then blood flows through them more easily. You can't get high blood pressure. That's one health adaptation. You get a molecular and physiological health adaptation that causes a structural change and a functional change in how efficient your blood vessels function and work. You don't want high blood pressure. Dangerous, dangerous, dangerous. Heart attack, stroke, kidney disease, kidney death, blindness. That's what high blood pressure can do and does to lots of people around the world. It's insane. So the majority of people are in category B and category C. They are the most people, this is the last statement, people in category B and category C, these are the people most impacted by solving the problem first. If you're already in category A, you love chasing longevity. You love improving your health span. You love this concept of being a longevity builder for you, like I do. But most people aren't. And they're the ones I want to reach. They're the ones I want to pull in and draw in to this program, this project of the new science of physical health here on the channel and all that we do that's associated with that. Okay, we've got to get towards the end of this presentation here and help to draw this to a conclusion. All right, let's wrap up today's video learning episode here, or this section, the lab section, the new science of physical health lab that we're in. And then I'll wrap up the video learning episode back on location again, as I like to do the videos the way they work. Start the video on location somewhere, come into the new science of physical health lab, really dive into it as we have today with an education framework. and you can see why I've done that, and then finish on location somewhere else. So my mission, my shifting focus, let's go from managing the crisis, the chronic diseases, and teaching people. Before we get to that, let's take it back a section and get to problem solving. Solving the problem of helping, it says here, individuals to fall in love with wanting to be physically healthy. How do I do that? Inside my book and inside some other segments of the work that I do, I have another framework called the magical way. I actually developed this framework with my students over a period of about, 5 to 10 years. And I started out with an idea in my head and I tested it out with my learners and then I refined it. I started out and I took that refinement and I refined it again. And I took that and I said, well, we could tweak this a little bit. It's called the magical way. The magical way that I get people to fall in love with wanting to be physically healthy. It's a whole other framework. So that's right smack bang in the middle of the book, the Perfect Health Lesson book. It's also in my Perfect Health Lesson online classroom and a whole lot in the premium podcast as well. Because it's the tactic that I use on helping individuals who are not in love with, they're either person B or person C. They lost interest along the way. They never had interest in the first place, and they don't understand the link between the correct dose of physical activity and their risk of dying early or being permanently hurt by a chronic disease in their life. Because a motivated individual is an empowered one. That's true. But what I want to do as I go back on location is I'm going to share with you some of the more ideas and concept around being a longevity builder. What is that concept for me? And I read and saw a YouTube video of Dr. Peter Attia. If you've never seen him, go check out some of his stuff. He's a fascinating guy, but it's in depth. I try to kind of bridge the gap between doctors and the real world. I'm a teacher, an education teacher. I'm not a doctor, nowhere near a doctor, but I got a lot of ability to take medical concepts and break them down, make them a little bit easier. That's pretty much what I do. So Dr. Peter Attia talks about what he came up with this idea, the centenarian decathlete, or the centenarian decathlon. What do you want to be able to do in the last decade of your life? How physically well do you want to be in the last decade of your life? Well, his whole work around the area of longevity, Dr. Attia, is to teach people how to build their life so that they have that last decade of their life, the last 10 years of it, they have whatever decade that's going to be, they have the most physical health they possibly can. It's a great concept. Mine is not quite so complicated. It's not so much built around, as I said, I love Dr. Peter Attia's stuff. I love a lot of the guys that are online and ladies that are doctors that are putting out content. But I don't fit into that category. I've created a concept called longevity builders, a community of people that want to be longevity builders. And I have a laser focus on one thing: increase your oxygen efficiency score. That's what it's all about. And teach you how to do that, how to track that, how to fall in love with that, and watch the impact of that cascade over decreasing your clinical complications and risk of having complications from the big four that I mentioned earlier: excess weight or obesity, heart attack and stroke, type 2 diabetes, high blood sugar, and the cluster of conditions known as metabolic syndrome. That's what I'm driving at here as an educator, not as a doctor. Longevity builder. All right, everybody, that's the lab. I'm done with the lab today. Let's go back out on location. Let's wrap it up. I want to dive more into what it means to be a longevity builder.
Hey, thanks for watching The New Science of Physical Health. If you're serious about living stronger, longer, hit like and subscribe. No single intervention is more powerful for improving your longevity and health span. And this channel shows you how, with real science, not hype. Take control of your health and share this with someone you care about.